site was identified as priority site number 1 in the Chippewa Creek erosion control study and inventory that was completed in 2015 by Water's Edge, and we identified this as priority site number 1. So we're looking at this site under the Class CA process through the Conservation Authority Class CA process. It is an undersized concrete pedestrian bridge, so it's a bit too small for the creek. In other words, it's confining the creek. The bridge abutments and the vertical retaining walls are forcing the creek to come in a little bit, so there's a lot of erosion and degradation along there. So we need to look at this creek, and we're doing so through the Class CA process. Certainly the hatched area where the creek is flowing through is currently a little unknown. The big landowner in the area is the orange, which is the Ontario Northland Transportation Company. The blue is rights of way from the city of North Bay, as well as this little green area is also the city of North Bay. And then the yellow is the private, which is that building that's located right at the pedestrian bridge, that area right there, that's private land. And then North Bay-Mattawa CA also owns a little bit, and that's that light pink through here. Those are somewhat known. The rest of it is a little unknown, but we're working on that still. The next, on the right-hand side is a graphic of the trail system. Any information that I'm presenting on this board for the trail system is still draft, but the City of North Bay has initiated the active transportation plan study. As you're aware, just on Main Street, which is the north side of our study area, there's a big pedestrian bridge across there, and that forms part of that active link, pedestrian link and trail link through the city. But as well, the bridge that we're considering replacing is also part of that trail system. So we're looking at integrating that into it. The trail people have looked at it so far. They have identified it as an important link, and they believe it should be removed and replaced with something that would be significant and structurally and graphically relevant to the trail and to the history in that area. The next board talks about more of the stream issues and the hydrology and hydraulics and the fluvial geomorphology. But as you're aware, the Chippewa Creek at that area drains a large watershed reaching well past the airport and draining through the town. Johnson Creek and the Eastview tributary all drain into that as well, including the mall. So there's a lot of water coming through there. And if a 100-year flood was to occur, there would be approximately 40 cubic meters per second flowing through that, or 40,000 liters per second would flow through that creek. The average that we see at any given moment during the summer is probably about 600 liters per second. So a lot of flow comes through there. And I mentioned before that the bridge itself is somewhat constraining those flows, causing flows to go up and over. So we're looking at that as part of the problem and trying to rectify that as well. And because the bridge constrains flows, it also causes flows to accelerate through between the abutments and then causes erosion downstream. And since the creek can't access the floodplain on either side, it actually degrades the creek invert, or the substrate. So there is a lot of problems caused by that. Not only this bridge as well, but the other, the old rail bridge is located just further downstream. So there are two bridges, and we're looking at the pedestrian bridge, but as part of this study as well, we're also incidentally, let's say, looking at the rail bridge, which we would like to see removed at this time as well. From a fluvial perspective, it's obviously being realigned. This was actually a somewhat wildly meandering stream through here in the past, and it's been straightened to accommodate the rail bridges and the pedestrian bridge. The rail bridge was constructed in 1905, so there's speculation that perhaps all the straightening occurred at the beginning of the century, give or take, right, to accommodate some of these bridges that were put in. As I mentioned, there's a lot of erosion, a lot of impact in that due to the energy of the constriction, and so the creek bed is easily erodible. There's sand and cobble in there, and that all consistently moves downstream. And you can see the sand deposits moving from upstream, from north of the escarpment, let's say all the way through the system and flushing out into the bay where there's a lot of sand deposits downstream as well. So Some of that erosion resulted in the undermining of the structures there as well. So it's all part of the problem. We have FRI, Ecological Services, doing the aquatics and terrestrial aspects of it, but we do note that there is evidence that there's brook lamprey in the creek, and that's an endangered species, so we have to be careful about that as well. And some of the vegetation, there is some vegetation there, not hugely significant, but nonetheless it's there, the forested areas, but it is also largely impacted by the existing buildings, the abutments, the road, the kind of manicured area just to the between Oak Street and the creek as well. But there is also some invasive species there, Japanese knotweed, which I've seen having walked the creek. It's here and there and everywhere. That should be removed as well, right? So Japanese knotweed, not a good thing to have in your creek. It takes over habitat. From a geotechnical perspective, there's a couple of meters of fill, and then below that there's which is classified as silty sand fill, and there is material in there that you could tell, wood chips and glass within that when they did the borehole, so you can tell it's fill. And then underneath that is underneath the silty sand fill, there is a sandy silt material, which goes between 4 to 6 meters down. Right. So when we're doing the abutments, certainly on the north side or on both sides of the creek, we're going to be dealing with probably deeper structures or perhaps screw piles in order to get it down far enough, because it's likely not that fill will not be competent for it won't have proper competence for abutments. From an archaeological perspective, Horizon Archaeology from North Bay did that assessment. A stage 1 inspection was done, and nothing of any interest was found there. The site is disturbed, and there's no further requirements from an archaeological perspective for this bridge. The Ontario Northland Bridge, the rail bridge, is a different story, and something may have to be done. They're recommending further study, but that has to be determined still by the city, how far that's going to go. The rail bridge was built in 1905, and you can see the sign there, and it was built by F. Monroe. Don't know if that's a company or not, or just a private individual, but that's what it was built. It says 6, but it should be 5, 1905. This particular slide is the background information, which is basically a copy of the output from the Chippewa Creek study that we did in 2015. And this is where this site was identified as priority site number 1. And largely as a result of the abutments and the erosion and everything that was happening at that location, the complexity between the bridge, the 2 bridges, let's say, and the need to do something about that. So it was identified as priority site number 1, and a possible recommendation at that time was basically armor stone. We do have a building that's very close by the creek, and so this would likely have to be protected somehow, and that's likely going to be armor stone. And then let's say the north banks would be graded back so that there would be a natural vegetation could grow on there, and it would give the flow some room to get through, possibly reduce flood elevations in that area. A bit better. This slope would be vegetated and naturalized, allowing a better cover, better protection, and some shading as required, and potentially having this creek slightly meander a little bit more within there. That'd be a wish list right now, given the fact that the flows are, it would require quite a bit of land in order to get this to meander properly. But certainly we're going to be looking at this, and that's what's probably reflected on one of our options right there. As part of any class environmental assessment, one of the options, the first options, is always do nothing. So right now we have 2 bridges. They would remain there. They would nothing would be done. There would be other than maintenance. The bridges are closed, both bridges are closed, And so there would be no access. The public would have to go around. Over time, the bridges may entirely fail and fall in, and then they would be removed. The banks would slowly fail, and they would be repaired as required. It's very likely that as you go through the evaluation matrix, that this would readily fall out very quickly. Because while there's no cost now, the cost is in operations and maintenance going forward, and environmental impacts, et cetera. So, option 2 involves the removal of the bridge. Now we've numbered them Bridge 1 and Bridge 2 for that matter. There's the Oak Street Bridge, there's the Ontario Northland Bridge. In option 2A, we would just remove the pedestrian bridge, period, that's it. And then in option 2B, we'd remove both bridges. What that would do is that it would open up the creek a little bit. We'd still have some abutments there, so there wouldn't be a great net benefit. It's just merely removing the bridges that could potentially fall in. There would be some improvements to flood flows because there's no obstruction there during the 100-year event or regional event, but there's not a lot of net benefit in this particular option as well. Similar to 2, let's say, option 3A is a removal of bridge and then a replacement with a new bridge, which would be set further back. So there would be some improvements to the bank in the immediate vicinity of the removed abutments. So here the existing abutments is underneath the red bridge. They would be removed, and the new abutments would be set back further from the creek. So there might be some minor tweaking of the banks, nothing major, just improving the flow conditions slightly, but allowing the placement of the new abutments. But indicated previously with the fact that there's several meters of fill on the site, probably on both sides, given the historic alignment of the channel and that it's been moved and channelized here. There's several meters of fill on both sides, and so the abutments would likely have to be fairly deep or at least screw piled to a competent depth anyway. So, but nonetheless, the abutments would be further back from the creek than current, which would allow flood flows to more readily move through. It would not necessarily call for any widening of the creek, other than perhaps some minor grading back, or you're removing some of the abutments there. On this side, it would not be nothing. It would just be perhaps patching it with concrete or something to remove whatever was there and fix it up, right? And then 3B is the same as 3A, except that the second bridge is removed as well and just left there, just opened up. Option 4, 4A and 4B, deal with the removal of the bridges and bank grading and fixing the banks on both sides. So in 4A, we're removing the abutments on both sides. We're grading the banks back and stabilizing the bank on this side with armor stone, and then doing the multi-stage bank with plantings on the right bank. Again, 4A, this bridge stays in place, and 4B, this bridge is removed, and the grading extends further upstream and downstream, and this potentially could extend all the way past here as well, but the limits of this have to be determined. Certainly there should be some armor stone here protecting this building and replacing that, but from here on it becomes how can we grade this back so the trail will stay in place. There are some abutments through there that would be removed, but this could be graded as well with the armor stone limited to here. But so this is conceptual right now. We need armor stone on this side. The length of it is to be determined. So currently we're in the Class EA process. We're inviting comments from the public to go through and look at these options and determine what would work best for them from a trail perspective, environmental perspective, from a physical perspective, infrastructure, let's say, from the city's perspective, let's say. And we're going to look at all that information and continue our studies, put everything into a big matrix and determine where things would fall out, basically. So the next steps, let's say, would be to receive the comments that to review the comments that we've received from the public and finalize our fieldwork and analysis, and ultimately select a preferred option, which would go out to everybody and then And then ultimately, we would finalize that report, put it out for the 30-day review period, and where the public can comment on it, the reports would be placed at perhaps in this office, at the City Hall, libraries, I'm not sure where they would all go, and probably on the internet somewhere as well. And public has a chance to comment on that, and at the end of that 30-day review period, we would publish a notice of completion or address any issues, and then publish the notice of completion. And then we would move on to a final design.